Hi, this is Lee from the Bar Exam Toolbox and the Law School Toolbox. Today, we want to talk about how the NextGen rollout is changing the Legacy UBE as well. I mean, This is weird because you talk about getting a whole new bar exam, and then they kind of dusted it under the rug that they were also changing the other bar too.
Yeah, this might sound a little counterintuitive. I mean, why would changing to the next gen change the legacy? But it is happening. And I think it's in ways that most people are going to be pretty excited about, actually. So we want to talk through them. Well, first off, when are these changes actually starting?
Well, fast. They're starting in July 2026, which is when they are going to start the NextGen rollout. But only a couple of states are going to be doing the NextGen. So most states are still doing the Legacy UBE. What are we going to call it? We can't call it the Legacy UBE anymore. I feel like if it's changing, shouldn't it get its own name? I don't know.
The new legacy.
The new legacy, the shifting legacy, the transitional. Maybe we should call it the transitional legacy.
Or just the transitional UBE.
The transitional UBE. Okay, we're coining that phrase right now. So the transitional UBE starts in July 2026, as they are also rolling out the NextGen.
All right, so let's dive right in to the big changes here. I want to take this right from the source because we know how things do change. So according to the NCBE website, which we will include the link, it's their preparing for the MBE link, effective with the July 2026 bar exam, wait for it, the following areas will no longer be tested on the MEE. Woohoo! That's not on the website. Conflict of laws, family law, trust and estates, and secured transactions. From July 2026 through February 2028, both family law and trust and estates will be tested regularly through the multi-state performance test. Lee, what do you take away from this?
Well, that they're getting lazy. I don't know.
I think it's like a fairness thing. It is kind of the case that if you're not testing these subjects on the next gen, you probably shouldn't test them on the other UBE too. But basically, this means people get to study fewer topics, which I think is a net win.
I think it is a net win for almost everyone. I do think that it's a little strange that the NCBE is changing their legacy UBE while also rolling out the next gen. It makes me wonder if some material might be shared between the two exams. Like, I know they're doing a 60-minute performance test, but they are also talking about, maybe I'm making too much out of this and mountain out of a molehill. But usually when changes like this happen, it is to make the administration of the test easier. So that would be kind of one of my questions. But as a test taker, nobody likes studying for these subjects. A lot of these subjects folks do not take in law school. I think if you're a foreign trained attorney, you should be jumping up and down because this is going to really lessen your load of studying for these, very specific essays that test nuances of these laws. And so for most folks, it's going to be a win. I wonder a little bit if it will shift the curve at all. Because with less law, that can happen.
That was my only thought. I think obviously most people just don't have any interest in studying secured transactions, and I totally get that. But yeah, it might make other people slightly better if you're trying to set a curve. But, I don't think it's really a downside.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I think the one open question that I can see here is, they make a point of saying that family law and trust and estates will be tested regularly on the MPT. And for those who aren't familiar with the MPT, and I hope everyone listening to the podcast is, this is the part of the test where you do not need to know the law to execute the part of the test. It's the practical application piece. So it might be on family law, but they're going to give you family law code, or they're going to give you cases, or both, to tell you what law to apply. So if you've never taken family law and you've never taken trust and estates, I do think you want to at least familiarize yourself with the type of issues that can be raised. I wouldn't want to go in cold knowing nothing about how trust and estates works and just get some code section on like the duty of trustees. And, you're like, who's a trustee? What's a trustee? I think that would be yeah, I think that would be a little intimidating. So you do want to still have an understanding of some of this material. what does that understanding mean? I don't really know because we've never tested on subjects that weren't also tested in a substantive way on the performance test. But maybe if you're listening to, like, let's say you didn't take trust in estates and you didn't take family law, I would probably want to look at an outline or listen to some lecture on it just to kind of anchor myself. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree. I don't think you need to study it in the way that you need to study it for the MEE, where you might have to recall a lot of information and actually apply it. But I do think you want to understand what are the basic issues in family law? What are the things that come up? Like, what are the rules that apply to them? That kind of understanding. And you can get that by reading, a 30-page outline probably. You can get at least pieces of it probably from some of our listen and learn episodes. I would not recommend those as your only way of approaching these topics. But,
No.
if you want to kind of see like, how does some of this stuff work? I think that's good. I mean, in trust and estates, again, like, if you're thinking about a will, there are kind of certain big picture questions that you sort of want to understand, like, is there a will? Like, is this will valid? Did somebody try to change it? What are the basic ways that we distribute things? If there's an intestate situation, these things I think of it as kind of the stuff that like your friends and family might want to ask you as a lawyer, even if it's not in your wheelhouse. And, I would be like, look, I was a patent litigator, but I can basically tell you how California divorce law works. You need to fill out this paper and like, here's the basic situation. I think it's like that kind of level of counseling type of stuff, of just general familiarity with the topics.
I think that makes sense. I also think you want to understand that in trust and estates and in family law, a lot of that law comes from codes. And so having an understanding of what law comes from the codes and what law comes from the cases and how those fit together, I think that would make sense if I'm thinking about a performance test. If I see a family law code that talks about a valid prenup, I should probably know that that's generally how that is done. But then also there are some famous cases about, how long you have to wait before you can get married after a prenup, or what is undue influence, or, and some of that stuff might not be in the code. So I think understanding how cases play into this law and how codes play into this law, I think that's something else that might be helpful as you get a packet of information that probably is going to have, a family code section and some case law.
Right, absolutely. I think that's definitely what we're seeing more on the NextGen. And I think, they're probably going to do that type of thing. I haven't actually looked at this as one of the things we're going to be updating in our Brainy Bar Bank, where we have our question bank. But I think people want to look at previous examples of performance tests in these areas. What did they include? What did they look like? Would I be able to do this successfully? What level of knowledge? I mean, even then, I don't think they were like assuming knowledge.
But I think there's an assumption of comfort level. So I was just looking at an old California performance test on trust and estates the other week. And just for those who aren't familiar with this, California used to have a 3-hour performance test. So aren't you glad you missed that experience? We didn't.
Twice.
But,
Twice.
Yeah,
It wasn't
twice.
just once. It was twice.
It wasn't just once. It was
6
twice.
hours of performance testing.
So you're welcome that you don't have to live through that. But it was interesting because it was technically a trust and estates question, but it was really a contracts question. When it all came down to it, a lot of what it was really about was whether this agreement outside of the estate planning could be enforceable as a contract, and what sort of, reliance was made on those promises and things like that. And it made me think about this issue of, how could trust and estates show up? In that way, I think that was still a trust and estates type question, but you also had to appreciate that what you were really writing about was contract law, and what was in the library involved that. It wasn't like they just left that out there for you to figure out. But I think that exposure to these different types of questions to see how some of these subjects might cross over, I think is also important, because you don't want to see that somebody died and just assume that you're in trust and estates land and have an anxiety reaction because you didn't take trust and estates in law school. I think you want to get exposure to see how even in some of these subject areas, you may be really talking about law that you're more comfortable with. And I wouldn't put that, I wouldn't assume that they won't do things like that. It's family law, but is it really family law? there's a family law and contract class, a family law and Civ Pro, like
Right.
kind of is there professional responsibility mixed in? You just don't want to have some sort of reaction because of the subject matter. And I think this is that same thing that we talk about with these wild card performance test questions. Every now and then they will ask you to do kind of a quirky task that may sound very intimidating. And a lot of students have a very visceral reaction about that, even though they will have to explain to you how to do the task, or it would be a very terrible exam question.
Right.
So,
And they generally provide a sample
yes, I mean,
of
they
the
walk you
task.
through it, or they couldn't get a curve, right?
Yeah.
So you're not supposed to know how to do it. But folks across the board, year after year, would have a very big reaction to this. And it happened on my bar. They asked us to write a closing argument, and a bunch of people got really, really nervous because they didn't know how to write a closing argument. But they gave you a sample, and they basically just told you to write a persuasive memo.
Right.
Basically what it was. And so you have to be ready to see some of the stuff and not have this panicked reaction of like, oh no, I didn't take that class in law school. So I guess that's kind of how I think this exposure will work, to just make sure that you're not going to freak out if you see something you didn't study.
Right. And on the flip side of that, I had a weird experience on the California PT, the very last one. So it was the last afternoon. It was like we've done 2.5 days of testing. Everyone is just fried. You're like ready to be done. You've got the 3-hour thing. I open up the packet and realize it's on the exact topic that I wrote my moot court brief on.
Mm.
And I was like, manna from heaven, like the gods are singing right now, just because I knew this law, like backwards
Mhm.
and forwards. So, if you have taken family law or trust and estates, and I think those are classes there's actually an argument to just take because it is the sort of law that's like useful in your own life and it's kind of useful. But I do think if you've taken these classes or have at least like a decent familiarity with it, you are going to have that moment of like, okay, I basically know this law. Like, obviously you have to read everything, but it's going to be a lot faster and easier than someone who's never seen any of it before.
That's true. I mean, I think everyone should take trust and estates and family law. I didn't take trust and estates. I kind of wish I had.
I did not either. I was signed up for
So
it, and then I switched to a seminar in federalism in the family, which turns out to be really relevant these days. But I
yeah,
did debate over that one a long time.
yes, I did take both community property though and family law. So I did get some of it in those classes. You at least get the basics.
Yeah,
But these are the real life law. I mean,
I was
let
like,
me tell you.
yeah, like our
everyone's
post-law,
going to touch this law.
yeah, our post-law school experience has definitely made us realize the value of taking both of these classes.
Yes. Let's talk about what Alison and I talk about with each other when we want some like legal like thoughts on things. It is often about like these are the real things, right? You're planning for the future. Somebody's suffered a loss. You have family members who start having more kids and don't have updated documentation. You are wondering if your own documentation is updated. You hear a story about somebody's documentation causing all this drama, and then you're digging through your documentation, wondering if it's okay. Most of us don't even understand the documentation that our trust and estates lawyers give us. I mean, it's really hard. And so I do recommend learning this stuff and family law, even if you're not planning on partnering up legally with somebody. There's still a lot of law in there that is important to understand. I think even if you're going to cohabitate with someone without being married, you need to understand what rights you have to that. And if you do decide to get married, you have to understand when you sign the dotted line on your contract what you're exactly signing.
Yeah.
If you haven't created your own rules with a prenuptial agreement. So there's a lot of real things. So that's kind of a bit of a sidebar. But if you have time, you should definitely take these classes in law school.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of interesting. I mean, they're even interesting to read through. When I took the California bar, I had not taken community property, but I was like, I don't mind the 2 to 3 days I just spent working on this. Like, that's useful stuff to know if I'm going to live in California and like people are going to ask me questions.
Yeah. And someday somebody will call you and say, I need some advice on what to do because I think I might be leaving my partner or my partner is leaving me. So
Right. It will happen. You're a lawyer. You will get those calls.
Yes.
So I think there's an argument for taking the class or at least being familiar. But in any case, you should probably not show up to the bar after July of 2026 with zero understanding of family law or trust and estates. Like, at least get the basics down.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to go to your law school bar services if you're still in law school, and chat with them about this too. They should have some recommendations, especially if your school contracts with Barbary or Themis and brings them on campus. I would push them to see what the recommendations are. I mean, the reality is nobody's seen the new transitional UBE that we've renamed it,
Mhm.
but it should look pretty much the same. It's just going to have different subject areas. But these are also open questions that your law school and your bar providers should be giving you guidance on. And if you're not getting that from them, put some pressure on them. Ask the questions. Keep asking questions until you get some answers.
Right. And if you have a bar course, where you're doing the MPT, obviously it seems like they would want to be doing an extra dash of family law and trust and estates. Like, certainly we're going to have our students doing extra ones of those. As I mentioned, we're planning to update the Brainy Bar Bank. So we'll have categories of these specific ones that you can practice on. But, all of this, I think you've just got to be aware of it and pay attention to.
Yeah. I think that's what's challenging about this transitional time is that there's new information for basically everyone at this point. Maybe not in California, but we lived through the dumpster fire of them trying to write their own test, and so we're still reeling from that hangover. But I will say, for anyone who is anxious or really struggles with novelty, this can be very stressful to have your school maybe send out updates about the exam changing. Perhaps you're not sure which jurisdiction you're going to sit in yet. You're listening to this saying, like, oh my gosh, which one of these exams am I supposed to take? I think that there are a lot of open questions. I think it's really important to realize that there, at this point, is still plenty of time. There is time to get more information. There is time to decide where you're going to sit for the test. There is time to be thoughtful about how you're going to prepare. There is no fire drill. And you do want to be conscious of all of these changes, but don't let this really ratchet up the anxiety. Because if anything, this is lightening your load,
Yeah.
which is good news.
Right. Well, on that point, I do want to talk a little bit about if someone's debating for whatever reason between taking the exam in February of 2026 or July of 2026. We can think of a number of scenarios. Maybe you're working, you're out of school, you're transitioning to a different jurisdiction, you failed, you're not sure you have time to study, whatever. There are lots of reasons. Um, do you think it makes sense to just wait and take this new transitional version or get it done in February?
I think it's so individual to the person. I think for someone who is already familiar with these subjects, I don't know that doing these additional subjects and taking the true legacy exam before these changes may not be to your disadvantage. But if I was a foreign trained attorney who did not go to law school in the US and who is learning all of this law for the very first time, um, I might say I am going to sit out and learn less law
Right.
because the heavy lifting of learning all of this law is a ton. And I think that it's really specific to the person. But I think for foreign trained attorneys, people who really are coming and through bar prep learning substantive law, I would probably pause until there was less law to learn. I think for other students, it would be the question of whether or not you got exposure to these topics in law school. Are you starting from zero? Um, if you are, then you may be in a similar position to some of these foreign trained attorneys. But if you took these classes in law school or you don't find learning substantive law a huge challenge, then I don't know. I don't know that there's a huge benefit to waiting. What do you think?
I mean, I agree. I think obviously it depends on the individual circumstances. If it's somebody who's just like, oh, I was kind of thinking maybe I'd take the bar. It's not really that crucial to my life. It doesn't really matter when I do it. I'm like, cool, maybe just wait till July. But, if it's somebody who took the July 2025 exam, you find out you didn't pass, I think that's a different scenario of this material is probably fresher in your head. You probably just want to get this done. I don't think in that scenario it would necessarily make sense to wait solely for this reason, although I do think overall it's going to be helpful for people.
Yeah. We talk to a lot of people who fail the bar, and the volume of information is often not the main reason why I think some people don't pass. I mean, I think some folks do struggle with the volume of information and having time to study, but there's a lot of other stuff in there, finding time to study,
Yeah.
setting an accountability structure for yourself, being focused when you study, doing practice, getting feedback, balancing working and studying, all of that. I think that, the amount of law that's tested will, of course, influence how you study. But there are also other big issues that lead to folks struggling with this exam that I hope folks continue to focus on and don't just focus on this substantive law piece.
Right. Well, also, I don't think for many people, the difference between having an essay on secure transactions or not is really going to be the reason you pass or fail the bar. Like, there's
Yeah.
usually, like you said, there usually are other reasons. Um, but, other than make a timeline and like something about perfecting interest, that's pretty much all I've retained about secure transactions. So, was the time I spent learning that useful? Probably not.
Yeah.
Would I have been happier if I never knew about them? Maybe. Not something you really come up with. Like, they don't come up that often. It's not like real estate where you like need to understand the title system because you're probably going to have property at some point. Secure transactions, you're like, I don't know. Whatever.
So we've heard some other rumors that the multiple choice might be changing, but has there been anything official released about this?
I think the official answer is it's not. I feel like in the last like maybe 18 months or so, I started hearing from people taking exams and saying the multiple choice was feeling really different. I believe at one point I even reached out to someone at the NCBE and got a response that was like, no, we're not changing anything. We're not testing the new question styles on the old exam. Like, that's not happening. We made some updates in terms of like language or whatever, but like the questions are not changing. So the official word, I think, is they are not changing. I mean, also now they're basically going to be, it seems like, using them on the next gen. So I don't know on that one. I mean, what have you heard from students?
Yeah. We frequently do hear, this test didn't feel anything like the practice. But you always have a subset of bar takers, especially who weren't successful, which is the most of the population we speak to.
Right.
That
They wouldn't talk to us otherwise.
right? That mentioned that the MBE felt very different. I will say, I even remember from my bar experience that under timed conditions, the MBE always feels different. It is way more stressful. We are also very used to using crutches when we practice to give ourselves positive reinforcement or information. So for instance, if you're doing individual questions and always finding out whether you got it right or wrong, that changes a lot how you feel about a test than sitting and taking a test for 3 hours without any feedback. Positive and negative feedback can influence you in different ways, but that still influences your experience. I am a very impatient person. I work on patience as one of the things I always need to work on in my life. And so I enjoy getting immediate results. Like, I get an email from my doctor that says I have blood test results, and I'm like on there that minute. Like, there's no, like, I just always like information as soon as I can get it. And so when I sat down to do 3-hour practice tests and the actual MBE, it was very hard for me not to get intermittent feedback. And that made the test feel a lot harder. And it messed with my feeling of adequacy around the test. I was really sure that I did incredibly poorly, partly because I had no positive reinforcement that I was doing anything right. And so that plus stress and anxiety and what it feels like to sit in a room with a bunch of other people taking this test, that is also going to just change how the test feels. It's going to make the questions feel different. You're going to feel like it's harder. It is harder under those conditions, like just for anyone.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, and I also think there are always like some weird questions on every version of the MBE. I mean, some of them in the past they've been testing. I don't know if they're still testing them. I mean, I think they probably are still testing some. But they were always, I mean, yeah, I remember walking out of the MBE and being like, I definitely failed that test. And I'm really good at standardized tests. The only reason I passed the bar is probably the MBE. But I actually like reached out to a good friend of mine in law school. I was like, I don't think I'm going back tomorrow for the essays. And he was just like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there's no way that I passed this test. He's like, you probably did. You should go to the essay day. Like,
Yeah.
but is that feeling of like, there's just no way. And you always remember like those couple of weird questions. You're like, I have no idea what that question was even asking me. So I think like you said, I'm not sure it's any different, but I did hear more people telling me it felt different.
I think that, the other thing people need to keep in mind is just that, especially if you've been doing practice multiple choice in law school, like multiple choice questions are also very hard to write and very hard to score to get, well, to make sure that they have the reliability. So it's like writing one, like I could just sit here and write one right now, but
Right.
it has to be tested and vetted. And if it makes it onto the MBE, it has like made it through multiple rounds. And
Yeah, they actually test.
they do, not
California
like
could learn
California
something.
that just runs it through an AI. Who needs to have a lawyer actually look at those? That's very
Yeah,
silly.
I'm sure it's fine.
I'm sure it's fine. I mean, AI never lies. So, but I think these questions have gone through like lots of rounds of vetting. And I think sometimes when you use your tools like UWorld and Adaptable, they're doing as good of a job as they can to also present you with practice questions that have been internally vetted. And I'm sure that they continue to vet them, but it is not the same. Like they are still practice questions. And the real release questions that are in those programs are hold. That's why
Yeah.
they're released. They're not used
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And so, of course, there's going to be some discrepancy. So sure, should the CBE be testing new questions? Yeah, they're writing a new bar exam. I'm sure that they are testing some questions that they are tweaking a little bit. Those could be the unscored questions, but you don't know that when you're taking the test, right? But also in reality, like the practice is never going to exactly mimic what's in the room. And everybody thinks that they did a garbage job. I did too.
Yeah.
Like, I called my husband at lunch and was like, oh, that's it. I'm done.
Like, I'm not going to be a lawyer.
I'm not going to be a lawyer. And he was just like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Probably have some lunch, have a coffee, and do the
Go back.
afternoon. Like, that's all you can really do at some point. It's either go home or go back to the test.
Right, exactly. So, I don't know. I think that with all of these changes too, there's a lot of anxiety around what the NCB is doing with these practice questions. And there's high anxiety around the bar exam as a whole. And
in general.
So I think that every piece of feedback somebody's giving you is through the lens of anxiety. I think it can also be, the other way with the NextGen. I was talking to someone who had a friend who sat for one of the practice proctored tests. So it was like after the real MBE, they invited some people back, and I think they paid them to sit for the test again. And her friend was like, "Oh my gosh, that was so easy." And I'm like, "Okay, well that's great, but also you weren't under stress to take the test. Like it didn't have any bearing."
Yeah, you'd already studied for
and
like
you'd
all
already
this other
studied
stuff.
and executed a full bar exam, and you got no scores, so you have no idea if it was as easy as you thought it was. And so it's just another great reminder of how everybody's perception plays into a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we wrap up, any final thoughts?
I think everyone needs to stay dialed in. I think that you do not want to be surprised when you sit down to study. So read your emails from your law school and your bar, academic support office. I'm sure they are sending updates. If they're not, you should ping them. But I'm going to guess that everyone we know who works in these offices is working very hard to help their students navigate this changing landscape. But I think you do need to stay on top of it and not be surprised. Changes are coming and there's nothing we can do about it.
They are coming. I think in this case, I think it's one of the few times we can say, like, I think this is a great thing for people who are sitting in July 2026. Like, you got to learn less material cold. Most of that material is stupid anyway. So it is a net win. Also, I mean, you kind of probably know what one of the MPTs is going to basically be on. So that kind of actually may reduce some of the anxiety load. Is like, well, one of them is probably going to be family law or trust and estate. So you're not going to be shocked when you open that package. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I would even honestly go to the NCBE website like before you start studying and just actually look at what they're saying, because things are changing very rapidly, and some of the communication around those changes is not necessarily like getting out so much, I think.
No, because there was some new document that was supposed to be released and it just didn't get released in September. They just don't.
Yeah. So I would say, like, if I'm going to start studying for, the July exam, whenever I'm going to start, like a few weeks before, I might just go and download the subject matter outline, like look it over, see what it says, see what they've got starred on that given day. Read through like the different pieces of the test. They explain them. I mean, like we said, we took that note directly from their website, but you want to be aware of like, oh, this is what I need to know and what I don't need to know.
Yeah.
And, hopefully whatever bar prep you're using also knows that, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on it. I would be like, doing my own
Asking
research a little bit.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, never a dull moment here. For years, the bar exam was so boring. It was
It's
always
so
the
boring.
same. It was so boring.
Now, never a dull day.
Never a dull day.
Barland.
No.
Yeah, there's also some other tests now called the NextGen and some other like completely so half the time you find like these NextGen, like it's like a nursing exam or something. That I was just like, oh my God, can't wait. Whatever. Transitional. Here we go. There you go. It's a transitional version of the Legacy UBE.
Oh, I will make one other warning though. I do not think you can trust everybody's good friends ChatGPT to keep you abreast of this stuff. We have used to test it out ChatGPT and Claude to cross-check some of this stuff, and it is wrong. Both of them are wrong. It's
they find like old press releases.
Yeah.
Like it's just, do not rely on that.
Please do not. I know that we're all relying on AI for things, but this is one where you need to go to the source and read the NCBE's website or what's coming from your law school. And if it looks like whatever was published was written by AI, I would go back to read the NCBE website. I'm just saying it's been surprising to me how much wrong information has been spit out at me.
Yeah, because I'll be like, no, that is a press release from 2023. Things are different now.
Yes. So anyway, word to the wise, just a bit of a warning. You can't trust, especially in this arena, what comes out of some of these AI LLM tools.
Right. But the good news is the NCBE does have links to what they plan to cover, and you can download them and look at it. And I would recommend doing that.
Yep. Old school. Go to the website.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, and please give us a like and subscribe. Visit barexamtoolbox.com for bar exam tutoring help, and we will see you soon.